Dr. Ashison here, and we're talking about language development. So languages is really a highly complex developmental system, and we don't necessarily always think about how complex language is because we as adults are pretty proficient at it. But it's got a lot of different moving parts, one of which is receptive language. That's comprehension, what you understand, what kind of words you understand, what your vocabulary size, those sorts of things. Expressive language is what you can produce, what you can say. And what's important to note is that comprehension always precedes production. So I am not bilingual a second of the day. However, I do have some comprehension for various Spanish words, various Spanish phrases, and I can comprehend a lot more than I can produce. So I can, if I'm reading something in Spanish, especially if it's simple, signs, those sorts of things, I can figure out what it says. I can comprehend what it says. If somebody says something slowly to me, I can comprehend what they say. But my production is abysmal. What I can produce is very, very low. And so it's not only in terms of my situation in adults, but in terms of kids learning language too, we see that this is always the case. Comprehension always precedes production. We see comprehension really starting at about 6 months of age. So if you've been around babies, you know that 6-month-olds don't talk. They don't usually say words, but they can understand what you're saying. And again, this is that idea that comprehension is preceding production. And we don't see production until about the first birthday with 1 to 2 words. And again, that's a developmental average, so there is a range around that. This highly complex system involves a bunch of different other moving parts too. You need to understand the social interaction and the rules of communication, the pragmatics that we take turns, and how to use those words and how these social interactions work and how language is a tool for social interaction. It also involves muscle development. If you think about all the muscles required to say a word, you're using your lungs, breathing, you're using your tongue, your lips, your throat. All of these things are working together in terms of motor skills. And a lot of times we'll see that children seem to be able to kind of speak, in air quotes, sooner if we're teaching them signs. That's because the motor skills required in their hand are a lot less complicated than the motor skills required in the vocal system. So again, we see that motor development is really, really a crucial piece of speech production. They also need to understand this referential understanding, that there's a link between the sound and the meaning. When they say mama, that mama sound means my mom, means that lady that takes care of me. That referential understanding is important. So that's going to be a piece of cognition. They're going to have to be able to have certain cognitive abilities before comprehension can even take over. There's vocabulary. We also have to learn grammar. Both of those are going to be important parts. Again, these cognitive abilities, memory, categorization, all of these different things are involved in this language system. So let's break down language from more of a linguistic perspective in terms of what components there are to language. And these are components that are out to all languages. We will talk about English specifically since I speak English and this is an English class. So phonology is the study of how sounds are made and combined to produce speech. And a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound that can affect meaning. So an example from English would be rip versus lip. The difference between the R and the L, the R and the L, those are phonemes. R, L are phonemes. And they, again, can change the meaning of that word. You put the R in front of ip, and it's rip, and that means to tear something apart. Where if you put the L in front of ip, it's lip, and that's the thing on your face that helps you talk. So again, these different phonemes help us distinguish that word rip from lip. And there are different phonemes in different languages, and we'll talk about that more later. But phonemes are in all languages, and again, these are specific to English. Semantics is the rule that determines how concepts are expressed in words or word combinations. So again, kind of how you can construct these sentences. The rules that determine how we can talk about these concepts in words. Another important component is grammar, and that's that structure of language. And that structure of language also includes morphology, how these words are built up, and how we can change parts of words to change their meaning. So while a phoneme was the smallest unit of sound, a morpheme is the smallest grammatical unit that possesses meaning. So for example, in the word unladylike, it consists of 3 morphemes and 4 syllables. The syllables really aren't important to this conversation, but the morphemes are. So means not, lady means well-behaved female adult human, and like means having the characteristics of. Each one of those has meaning to them. They're all morphemes. They are all have meaning when they put together. They make up this word unladylike. None of these morphemes can be broken up anymore without losing any of the meaning. If you try to break down lady into la and d, that doesn't mean anything. La doesn't have any meaning. D doesn't have any meaning. Lady does mean something. So it's not a syllable break. It's a meaning break. Another example is the word dogs. That is actually 1 syllable, but it has 2 morphemes. The word dog itself and the plural s. That s is a morpheme. It adds information. It takes that singular dog and changes the meaning and makes it plural. It doesn't have to be a whole syllable. Again, it can be anything that contains that meaning. And then finally, in grammar, syntax determines the order of our words and the structure of our sentences. So let's talk about how this language actually develops, okay? We're going to start with how production develops. And so first, it's a series of vocalizations that are produced. It starts really, really young with phonation, and that's just those phoneme sounds. So again, these smallest units of sounds, these different sounds that infants can make. And then we start to, and these are non-syllabic, so these aren't syllables, okay? This isn't going to be a syllable. This is just going to be a sound. And cooing we'll start to see around 2 to 3 months, and those are really these vowel sounds and velar sounds. But here's an example of some vowel sounds. You could hear those ahs and those ohs and those vowel sounds. That cooing is what we typically refer to it as, but it really is practicing those phonemes, practicing the sounds of that language that they're hearing, practicing those sounds. Next, what we get is we get expansion, where we start to get more vowel-like squeals, some marginal babbling, and then we get canonical babbling. And this happens around 7 to 10 months. And when you think of babbling, this is what you think about. You think about this incessant repeating of one vowel. Notice here in the example, it's ba ba. It's going to be the same vowel, the same syllable reduplicated. So when it says syllabication and reduplication, that's a fancy way of saying we take that same syllable and that baby says it over and over and over again until your mind wants to explode. Here is an example. So you heard that da 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 da, and then the ma 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 ma. Again, baby took that one syllable and just kept reproducing it over and over and over again. And kids will get stuck on a syllable, and they'll just can go on for days. But it's, again, all part of that practicing that vocal system, practicing that production, coordinating all of those motor skills that I talked about earlier. The next stage we have in babbling is variegated babbling. So here where we have the same syllable over and over and over again, variegated babbling is going to have, the syllable is going to change. So ba bee instead of ba 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 ba. So we're changing that second syllable, but we're still going to reduplicate that combination. You can see that we're starting to build up to words. So we start with just the phoneme sounds themselves, then we kind of get into the vowels, and then we kind of get into a syllable, and we just do one syllable all over again, and then we start to put those syllables together, which is what infants are going to have to do to produce their first word. So there's a lot of other pieces of communication that are going on before infants produce that first word. Again, we talked about phonemes. There are 45 different phonemes in English, and that's in English specifically. There are lots of other phonemes that aren't in English that children that are exposed to those phonemes will learn. But infants are able to perceive phonemes, and at birth, infants are actually able to perceive all the different phonemes in every language in the whole wide world. And through exposure, they're going to really narrow that down to the phonemes in their language. So if an infant is only hearing English, they're going to narrow down the phonemes that they're able to distinguish between to those 45, because those are the 45 that are important to them. Just like we talked about that perceptual narrowing in terms of face processing earlier on in this course, we're having that same perceptual narrowing in terms of phoneme perception. And this Ba-Da video by Janet Worker is a great example of that. It's both linked on D2L and on the YouTube channel playlist. And so you can, again, look at that. And it's an example from the Baby Human that walks you through some of this research, how we can see this perceptual narrowing, where we can see very young infants can still tell the difference between sounds that aren't in English, and older infants cannot. We also have categorical speech perception, the able to kind of put different speech sounds, put different phonemes into different categories. We know that infants prefer to hear their own language. There's another video that's also linked on D2L and on the YouTube playlist called Native Language Preferences. And again, that's Janet Worker. And these are newborn infants, and they will preferentially suck. So they'll have, it's a suck paradigm where they've got the little pacifier, and they will suck more to hear their own native language than they will of a language that they've not been exposed to. These are brand new babies. These are babies that have only really been presented language through the womb and very little exposure after birth. So again, they're already showing preferences for their native language. We also have early sounds and gestures that will contribute. We kind of walked through this already. Crying is, again, form of communication, and that will be the first communication. Then we'll go into cooing and then babbling. And again, remember, comprehension always precedes production. Again, typically we see comprehension at about 6 months of age, and production we usually have about 1 to 2 words by the first birthday. And these are averages, of course. Those first words, we really see that range is somewhere between 8 to 12 months. And when they're starting to understand the referential use of words. And they can begin to communicate by naming those words themselves, by using those words to communicate between 10 and 6 months. So understanding that mama means mama, that comprehension happens between 8 to 12. That production won't happen until afterwards, to 10 to 16, when they're going to referentially name something versus understanding that referential use. First words are typically objects that can act on the infant or that the child acts on themselves. So we'll see mama, dada, baba. Those are typically first words. There can be other words depending on the language used in the environment, the different meanings of these words, the different words that are prevalent in the child's environment. And they'll start to use these they'll start using these words only when the object's present. So saying mama when mama is there, not saying mama to call for mama. So it'll first be used in a non-symbolic way as a kind of naming, like that's mama, not where is mama. So an example would be only saying ball when the ball is present. But again, that will progress to using it in a symbolic way. Infants learn that these words represent objects, actions, and different states. And again, we typically have those words between 11 and 13 months of age. And initially, they learn words really slowly. So, you get mama, and it takes a couple of weeks maybe to get the second word, sometimes longer. But about 18 months, we start to see a really rapid growth in word development. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail next. One of the ways that children learn words is through parroting. Parroting is when just that, you have a parrot that says exactly what you say. And here's an example of that.
Say happy birthday, Daddy. Say I love you. I miss you. See you tomorrow. Blow kisses.
Okay, she's 26 months, and you could hear she was repeating what was being said. However, she was changing some of the syllables. She was dropping some words, and she was replacing them with easier sounds. So she didn't say tomorrow, which is very complicated for a 26-month-old to say. She says ma. So she left out some of those sounds, and she dropped words. She didn't say you one time. And again, but she was able to repeat back what was said to her. The meaning was still all there. She was just able to kind of adapt that in a way that she could produce. We really see that spurt in language, again, around 18 months. And this is when we really start to see that symbolic word use. This is when children can be acquiring up to 2 words a day. And this is from about 18 to 26 months. To really give you an idea of how this language birth works, at 2, children typically have about 200 words. By 6, they have 10,000 words. So it took 2 years to get 200 words, and another 4 years, they'll be 10,000. And so again, we really have a really rapid word learning. And we have a term for that. It's called fast mapping, and we'll talk about that more. At around, they can start to understand 2-word utterances before they're producing. So again, this is comprehension preceding production. They can understand 2 words together before they themselves are using 2 words together. And they can again acquire words after a single exposure. This is called fast mapping, when they're learning new words really rapidly after a brief encounter. So my favorite story about rapid word learning, or this fast mapping, is I was at my friend's house years and years ago before I had kids, and it was kind of a girls' night, and we were at home with her son, and our husbands were out, and we were talking about, I don't even know how we got on the subject of edamame, so the little soybeans. I think they were really just kind of becoming popular, and my friend had bought some, and I was telling her how much I loved edamame, and she was like, oh, is that how you say edamame? I have some in the freezer, but I didn't know how to pronounce it. I said, yeah, edamame. And her son, who's right there about 18 months, is sitting under the table listening to all this. He's just playing with toys. And he jumps up and he goes, edamame! He had never heard that word before. He heard us say it in a total of about 3 times in really rapid succession, and learned the word and said it perfectly, and very dramatically and excitedly too. So again, they can really learn these words really, really rapidly, and again, after a very brief encounter. So let's watch a quick video that talks about this language development. We've talked primarily about language development kind of before too. Let's talk about language development.
After the age of 2, there is a vocabulary explosion. Children learn words at an astronomical rate, acquiring more than 14,000 new words by the age of 6. Many new words are very difficult for the child to pronounce, so children develop all kinds of strategies to simplify difficult words. Initial consonants may be dropped or replaced with less difficult forms.
I got spaghetti and I'm free.
At the same time children are developing this extensive vocabulary, they are also beginning to use grammatical morphemes, or word endings that impart grammatical information such as possession, plurals, and tense. As children begin to use new word forms, rules for combining words and word endings may be overused. An error called over-regularization.
I love it. It's the bestest kind I ever had.
Then why don't you have another piece?
I don't remember when I watched it. I see somebody take it.
Preschoolers are also learning the system of rules, or the grammar of their language. By the age of 4, rather than using 1 or 2 words to make a request or to comment, children begin to use complete sentences that include adjectives, pronouns, and prepositions. They are better conversationalists and can talk about the things that interest them, such as preschool, their friends, or outings and interesting experiences. 4-year-old Caroline tells about her experience with bowling and miniature golf.
You bowl a ball like on a wooden. You try to not get it in a blue thing. If you do, then you can't knock the thing that is like the yellow. You hit a ball you try to get it into a hole. And you pick whatever kind of ball you want. We went to for Annalise's birthday party, and we went bowling for National Holy birthday.
So there was a lot going on in that video, and we'll talk about some of the differences. You can hear kind of the improvements between very, very young children and older children in terms of kind of coordinating those muscle skills. But as you could hear, she's 4, and the pronunciation that she's having problems with is still reflective of not really having that motor system down. When I go back and watch videos of my daughter, I am amazed how much her pronunciation changes so quickly. What seems like, oh my gosh, that was last year. How does she sound so different already? That coordination of those muscles to further articulate continues to develop. So we also have individual and cultural differences too that can change our language. I've already talked a little bit both in class and online about the input really can dictate the output. So how much language they're getting in can really dictate to some extent how much difference they're going to put out. Children that are in really vocal environments, and I'm not talking about like listening to the TV or things like that. I'm talking about listening to people talk and people talking to them specifically tend to talk sooner, and they tend to have more words. So the way we talk to children impacts how much language they have as well. And how we talk to them depends on that too. One way is referential style. And this will be, we typically see this in higher socioeconomic status homes. We tend to see it with first children regardless of socioeconomic status, and we tend to see it more with girls. And this is the use of language as primary to label things for informational uses. These kids will have a lot bigger kind of noun vocabulary. So they'll know more names of more different things because they're being referenced, hence the name referential style. Each thing is being referenced as having a different name. Another kind of expressive style is expressive style. And this is where they're being exposed to the use of language as a tool to talk to people about your feelings and emotions and things that are going on and interacting with people. And we tend to see this and sometimes lower socioeconomic statuses. We tend to see this more with differences in birth order. But again, we're going to see more of a mix of word types. It's not going to just be this, I know this kid knows like 374 words at 2. This kid may not know as many words, but the kid will know different types of words that will include more verbs, that will include more stock phrases, like let me see, like they want to see that. What's that? Things like that allow them to interact with others. And so we'll see differences. And this is in no way to say that one of these ways is necessarily superior in this context, but it is to say that the different kinds of input dictate the different kinds of output. So that again, we are able to see differences in how children speak depending on what they're hearing. We also have those semantic errors. So an overextension would be using one word to refer to many things that are similar. This would mean that their category is too broad. So if you have a small child that refers to a lion as a kitty, that's an overextension. They're taking that category of kitty and making it really, really big to include anything feline. And a lion would be included in that. Where an underextension is a lot less common. Overextensions are very, very common. We'll see that very typically. Underextensions aren't as common. And mostly, this is more of a comprehension issue. So children, an example using our same kitty example, children would only call their specific pet a kitty and not call other cats kitty. And again, that's an issue with comprehension, that they don't understand the word kitty is not the name of that particular cat, but is a category in and of itself. Another way we can have semantic errors is coining. When a child uses a different word that's not found in the adult vocabulary. So when my daughter was very young, it took her a while to say thank you properly. But when she was very, very young, she would go do-do. And she would say it with the exact same intonation that we would say thank you. But she was using that as a coin. She coined it as a way for her to express appreciation before she actually got thank you. And she held on to that sound, that her coined version of it, for a very, very long time. Her language was well advanced in other areas, and she was still maintaining that coined phrase. And so that can be a semantic error as well that we'll see in language development. We also see one-word utterances that are used either as a goal, as to label objects. We can also see it as goals for other kinds of things. An example of this is hollow phrases, and these are these single-word sentences that make up a lot more meaning. So thanks would be thanks for fill in the blank, right? Another example could be mama. Mama could mean there's mama. Mama could mean where is mama? Or mama could mean mama pick me up. And it's really dependent on the context. So again, that one word object, that one word utterance, this hollow phrase is the goal is to label, but we're getting a lot of different meaning depending on the context. And there's a lot more meaning contained in that hollow phrase than one word would typically imply. And we'll see that as a first way that children will communicate before they really developed more complex syntax. Semantic development is the learning of meaning of words. So when we do a vocabulary test, that's semantic development. And we have two different things that we talk about. We can talk about, in terms about learning, we can use syntactic bootstrapping. And this is the child's understanding of knowledge, helps them their understanding of grammar helps them understand the meaning of new words. Okay, so they understand how a sentence is typically structured, and so that they can use that to figure out what that word means. We've all done that. We've all done syntactic bootstrapping. When you were told to use your context clues to figure out a meaning of a word, you too were using syntactic bootstrapping. We also see that parents will label objects that the children are attending to. We'll have what we call joint visual attention, where we're both looking at something and we're naming it. And they'll label what the object is. Again, there's a video I want you to watch. I've titled it Joint Visual Attention. It's really a word learning study, though. And it's done by Amanda Woodward. It's, again, a baby human video. And it's linked both on D2L and on the YouTube playlist as well. So watch that video as you can really see how this semantic development is happening. And there's also really some other interesting ones where they'll look at how shape can be involved in semantic development and how different kinds of information can be involved in that as well. And we also see that modeling is really important to facilitate language development. Again, the richer the language environment the child is in, typically we see richer output from that child, as long as the language system is typically developing. Grammar, we've all got to learn that too, and that includes that word order, the inflections, the intonation, and in 18 months, children really can start to combine these words into simple sentences. And again, this is an average, but by about 2 to 3, they're really understanding the sentence structure of their particular language. In English, that's subject, verb, object. So I went to the store. The subject would be I, went would be the verb, and the store would be the object. So again, by about 2 to 3, kids are really starting to understand how these words are put together grammatically for their particular language. We see overregulation. You saw this in that video when the children were applying these grammar rules in ways that they weren't supposed to. So they were overextended. I taked it. They tried to add, instead of I took it, they took take and added ed to it. That would be an overregulation of that grammar rule. But take and took are an irregular grammar. Another example, so we're overextending those grammatical words and rules to words that are exemptions. Another example we've talked about earlier in the semester in terms of U-shaped development, which is blow, blew, blowed. So it's blow, blew are the proper ones, but what we'll see is first children will properly use the blew. I blew a bubble. So this is actually an N-shaped development. They'll be able to do it. They'll learn the rule. They won't be able to do it anymore, or they can't do it. They learn the correct blew just through modeling. They're hearing people modeling that proper grammar, and so they'll learn to say blew properly. Then they'll learn the rule, and they'll try and apply it, and they'll start saying blowed. And we'll be back down if they can't do it for that N, and then they'll be able to do it again when they learn that it's an irregular. And the final thing that I wanted to talk about in this language discussion is telegraphic speech. Telegraphic speech really only contains the critical words and nouns, and to really kind of leave out all the stuff that you don't need so that you're getting the meaning with the fewest words possible. This is not grammatically correct speech, but this is a way that children can communicate their meaning a lot more simplistically than you and I would. And it varies in meaning according to the context. And it can express a lot of different things depending on what needs to go. So mommy and daddy go bye-bye. So mommy and daddy are going to leave, something like that. Mommy, daddy go bye-bye. So, or another example, no mommy, no go sleep. So no mommy, I don't want to go to sleep would be the proper way to say that. Or that could be no mommy, you don't go to sleep, or no mommy, I don't go to sleep. And again, that varies in meaning depending on the context. So telegraphic speech is again kind of another stepping stone we'll see on this progression of language. This is going to wrap up our first section of the language development chapter, and we'll finish the rest in class. Thanks.